Our fifth LEED ND course is structured in two parts. First, several chapters on how to use the rating system outside of the United States, where almost 40% of ND projects originate. And a second part with concluding chapters that highlight upcoming changes in version 4 of the ND rating system. This will be the first update of ND since its inception. USGBC and the Green Building Certification Institute are accepting non-U.S. certification submissions that rely heavily on equivalency between U.S.-based requirements and circumstances in other nations. This course identifies major areas of required equivalencies and explores options for successfully demonstrating compliance or obtaining special exemptions. If you're an international project team, in other words, located outside the United States, there are three kinds of U.S. standards embedded in the ND rating system, and it's these three that you'll need to find equivalencies for. The first is cases where ND uses federal and sometimes state and local regulations and programs, government regulations. Examples are federally designated endangered species and historic buildings. The second type are cases where ND references professional organization standards, such as the energy credits that reference ASHRAE, which is the American Society of Heating and Refrigerating Engineers, and their standards for building energy performance. The third kind of ND measures that may not be directly transferable to another country are ND planning and design techniques used in the United States to achieve smart growth and new urbanist goals, but that may not be a good fit in other countries and other cultures. For example, ND discourages gated areas where gated access is common in many parts of the world. In other instances, ND thresholds may be considerably lower than typical international conditions. For example, many projects in other countries can easily achieve ND's minimum densities of 7 dwelling units per acre and a floor area ratio of 0.5, which are pretty significant thresholds in the United States. Because nearly half of ND certification submissions are originating outside the U.S., the USGBC has issued a special supplement to the ND reference guide that provides alternative compliance paths for non-U.S. projects. If you're on an international project team, you should definitely get a copy of the supplement, and remember it's designed to be used in tandem with the regular reference guide. It's not a full copy, but instead it just highlights the credits where official ACPs, or alternative compliance paths, have been approved. Also, the reference guide ACP supplement doesn't address every instance of a U.S. standard or practice that an international team may encounter. Instead, it's just an initial edition of what should grow to become a more comprehensive tool in the future. For now, once an international project's credits have been selected, the team should scrutinize the credits carefully for U.S. standards, and if any are found, then check to see if any official alternative compliance path or ACPs are applicable using the reference guide supplement. And if you don't find an ACP for a U.S. standard, then you're going to have to develop your own credible equivalency. Let's run through some of the major types of U.S. standards that an international team must address. The first type are location regulations, which are used to confirm transit service for eligible locations and to keep development away from sensitive environmental resources. We'll go into each of these in more detail in a following chapter. In addition to U.S. regulations, this part of the ND rating system also has U.S.-oriented planning practices that maximize the use of eligible areas and impose significant long-term protections on natural areas. And again, we'll talk more about these in a bit. The neighborhood design section of the rating system has only one credit with U.S. regulatory derived features, and that's visitability and universal design. So this is where an international team will encounter the least necessity for finding equivalencies. In contrast, this section of the rating system is heavily characterized by U.S. urban design practices and their thresholds. The list you see here are just some of the credit areas where international project teams will encounter North American-based thresholds and quantities. The last section of ND on green construction has a heavy dose of U.S. regulatory-derived standards, primarily in the 4 areas listed here. We'll go into more detail on each of these in a subsequent chapter. There's also a fair amount of U.S.-derived green design and construction practices in the final section, and we'll cover examples like these 3 and others in that following chapter. Right now, let's break for an interview with USGBC staff whose job it is to help international teams navigate the LEED process. To do this, let's talk with Sean Fish, a LEED manager, about assistance that international teams can get from USGBC.
Around 40% of our registered projects at this time are projects that are outside the U.S. So quite a bit of international interest in LEED, and because of that, we've been working very hard on trying to find ways to help those international projects achieve the goals that they would like to within the LEED rating system while still maintaining the stringency of the system itself. Starting with the 2009 rating systems, what we've been working on are adding global alternative compliance paths for our projects outside the U.S. And basically what those allow is for project teams with certain credits that have been notoriously difficult for projects outside the U.S. It allows them to use an alternative, a local alternative code or standard in place of a code or standard that is probably identified based off of a U.S. Rule. And so that's just one easy thing that we've been able to do. Another thing that we've done is we've been working very hard to add SI units, metric units to the rating system. That's one thing that a lot of our project teams have noted as soon as they started seeing those within the rating system, that was a really big help. And starting with the version 4 version of the rating system, project teams will be able to do all of their full documentation in SI units, so they won't even have to do any conversions to our American imperial units. With version 4, we've also been doing quite a bit of work in adding as much global language as possible to the rating system, so making sure that every credit where there is a standard or code that is identified, in most cases we've identified that a project outside the US can use a local equivalent standard, and that is hopefully going to be very helpful for our project teams in identifying local best practices rather than those that are necessarily identified here in the US. Right now, for our current USGBC 2009 projects, if you just go to the credit library, you'll find that there most of the information is just woven into the actual rating system itself, which is really nice. They shouldn't have to go too far out of the way to find the tools and resources that they need. But with the 2009 Global Alternative Compliance Paths, we do have some additional supplemental documentation or documentation guidance that is available for our project teams so that they can understand what the ACPs are and how they can apply those ACPs.